Welcome to Jesus Changes Everything, a daily podcast dedicated to providing a fresh look at the ancient and glorious truth that Jesus not only reigns, but is busy about the business of bringing all things under subjection, that celebrates the wonder and the glory that he has been given all authority in heaven and on earth.
If there's anyone out there who could conceivably help me find this guy, I would be really, really grateful and incredibly shocked. As so many of my friends on the Forever Friends segment, this particular friend has a name that doesn't make Google searching easy. It's a pretty common pair of names. In addition, this particular friend is not someone that I've had a conversation with probably in the last, almost 50 years, not quite 50 years. His name is Billy Parks. Billy Parks. Now, when my family moved from the suburbs of Cincinnati to rural western Pennsylvania, it was a massive culture shock for me. I had friends down the road who, and by the way, the road that we lived on was called Old Distillery because of the number of stills that operated in the hills along that road. This is very much rural hill country. And I had friends on that road who had no running water, who had no electricity. I had a friend on our bus route who lived in a foundation of the house for years. Billy Parks lived in a reasonably nice home with a reasonably sort of suburban kind of family. But he lived, maybe as the crow flies, half a mile away from me, and maybe along the road another quarter mile in length. And you had to walk across these fields to take the short version. And he had a little brother, he had an older brother, and there was him. And we didn't have a lot in common. He was a year older than me, but he was nearby, and he was a kid. And so we played together and had a good time. His grandparents lived next door in a beat-up old house. Across the street was a house that we used to call the haunted house because it was just completely dilapidated, and never got near it. But I would go over there and play with Billy, or Billy would come over and play where I lived. And it was just standard kid stuff. But one of the things I remember about Billy is he was one of these kids who had quite an imagination and had very little restraint against applying it to his own life. I remember a particular spring afternoon where we were in his backyard, and keep in mind again, this is out in the rural area. His particular yard was not heavily wooded, though it was wooded across the street. But there was some acreage there, and so we were flying kites. And I remember him telling me about what happened to him the year or two before that. He said that he had been flying his kite and it got so high that it got caught up in the wing of an airplane. Now, keep in mind that I'm still at the time young enough and enamored with technology enough that, when you're out in recess and a plane flies overhead, you all stop and point at it and look at it. It was a big deal. This would have been about 1972, I believe. And so he said this airplane flew by and it caught his kite on its wing and lifted him up off of the ground. Well, that was strange indeed. It was one of those moments where you realize people don't always tell the truth. I wasn't sold on the idea for a moment. I immediately thought, this is not true. But what's interesting is what that did, even as a 7-year-old, what that did for me in terms of other things that he told me. I mentioned he had an older brother, and even that is, I guess, in some level open for dispute because I don't think I ever saw him. I saw the younger brother. I never saw the older brother, but Billy told me that his older brother was a drug addict. That he lived in the house, that he stayed in his room, and he just did drugs all the time. Now, again, he's 8 years old. And I remember him telling me that, and I remember thinking, is this just another dramatic story from him, or is this real? And as a 7-year-old, trying to understand how critically important it is to know what was true or not. That if this was true, it was just horrible. There wasn't anything I could do as a 7-year-old, and certainly if it was true, his parents knew about it. And it was an awakening for me to have this right now. I'm not trying to talk bad about Billy Parks. I'm sure we all had friends, and maybe we were that friend who liked to tell exaggerated stories. I'm sure I've told exaggerated stories, even not just when I was young, but even to this day. So I don't want to speak ill of him. I do remember feeling compassion for him. I hope he's okay. I hope his older brother's okay. If you know a Billy Parks that grew up in Stallstown, Pennsylvania, would you get him this podcast? Let him know that, gosh, 50 years later, one of his friends remembers him and thanks God for him. He was a fun friend. So, as always, let me finish by asking you to do the same thing for yours. It's a new year. If you've got some old friends, track them down. Let them know you're grateful for them. And if you would, let me know how that goes. It is, if you are listening to this podcast on the day that it was publicized, January 6th, 2022. And it's time for our Ask RC segment, and I thought it would be fitting and appropriate, given the date, to seek to answer this question. What happened in Washington, specifically in the Capitol building, on January 6th, 2021? What happened in the Capitol building on January 6th, 2021? And this is another one of those occasions where I am blessed to give one of my favorite answers to any question, which is simply this: I don't know. I don't know. I am confident of a few things that didn't happen. One of which is this: what didn't happen was a well-organized, carefully planned, thoughtful attempt to overturn, or rather to overthrow, the government. I'm confident of that because I can't imagine a more feeble attempt than what actually happened. I mean, what we know is this many people went into the building. We know that there was no declaration of independence. I'm not sure what everything that the QAnon shaman had to say, but I'm pretty sure not very many people were taking him too terribly seriously, including himself. I think that if this was a genuine coup attempt, then this January 6th makes the Bay of Pigs look like a well-executed blitzkrieg of Hitler's. That is, it was lame sauce. Now, what I don't know is if there were conspiratorial plans. I don't know if there were conspiratorial plans on the left who determined to make the right look bad. I don't know if there were conspiratorial plans on the right to try to get the Congress to overthrow the election results. I have no idea. And I don't have a dog in that race. And I hope you don't either. You know, I wholeheartedly and fully believe in the importance of Christians being politically active. I think the idea that somehow you can separate politics from morality or morality from the Bible and therefore politics from the Bible is a reprehensible idea. I am radically 1K, not radically 2K. That said, it's not the same thing to say Christians need to be zealous for justice and righteousness and sound biblical government and saying whatever the Republicans did is good, whatever the Democrats did is bad. Now, I'm more conservative, more of a limited government person than any Republican in Washington. So don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I'm not saying, oh, they're both equally bad or their ideologies are both equally bad. I'm not saying that at all. I am saying that you can't let either party co-opt you and confuse either party's agenda with what the Bible teaches. So let's say, for the sake of argument, that on January 6, 2021, there were a group of people, including the president, who were seeking to overthrow an election. Christians should want no part of that, even if the election was stolen. That's not how you do things decently and in order. Anarchy is never the solution. No matter how bad things get, think of it this way, no matter how bad government gets, it is better than lawlessness. And there's nothing more lawless than a coup. I'm not saying it happened. I don't know. And I don't think we're ever going to know. I mean, that's one of the things that's just so strange about our days is we have virtually no hope of actually getting to the truth, not simply because the mainstream media has been owned by the left, but because with the mainstream media being owned by the left and using it as a propaganda tool, and conservatives on the right trying to fight back with the same tactics, we're left with no one to believe. Which is why I'm saying we need to stay above the fray. Not distant and aloof from the real hardships, but distant and aloof from the party bickering. What happened on January 6, 2021 is not something I suspect we're ever going to know this side of death. I don't think we're going to have a definitive, fair assessment of the reality of what was going on in the hearts and minds of everyone involved. I do know this, the closer you look at the hearts and minds of everyone involved, the more corruption you'll see. Because that's what we are. What happened on January 6, 2021, the same thing that's happening on January 6, 2022. Jesus reigns.
You've been listening to the Jesus Changes Everything podcast, a production of Dunamis Fellowship, the teaching outreach of Dr. R.C. Sproul Jr. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we encourage you to subscribe, which you can do at all the usual outlets, to tell your friends, and to spread the word. To learn more about the work of Dunamis Fellowship, please visit rcsproulJR.com and join us next time on Jesus Changes Everything.